Welcome to Story in a Bottle. I'm your host, Dan Maccarone. Each episode, our guests are leading voices in tech, media, and entertainment. And to get to know them better, we share their favorite cocktails as they share their stories.
Eric Friedman has not only spent most of his life in New York City, but also the majority of his career ingrained in the New York startup world. From his early career at the prestigious Union Square Ventures to one of the earliest employees at Foursquare, to being the head of Expa Labs, one of the most successful accelerators in the city, Eric has done it all. Over sparkling water, he talks about how all that led him to found his new company, Go Fractional, a community for fractional executives to find work and share collective experiences.
So I agree with you completely. Maybe we save this for this.
Oh, we're already recording.
Oh, great.
Got you on that one.
I totally agree. There's a small subset of people who can do what you do.
Yeah.
And actually go in and do a great job for a company. But the problem is they don't know it. And the populace is so small and the bar is so high. And so when you have a limited group of people with elite group of, elite talent, they can actually do it. But how do you find those people?
Right.
How do you actually trust those people? And what results that they previously did means they can do it again.
What do you, so this is there are so many things about that I want to break down, because the first thing is, how do you get people to believe in the idea of a fractional, especially C-level person, whether it be at a startup or even at a mid-level company? I imagine a larger company, it's a little bit harder.
It is. Maybe we should back up and give context of why I'm a little biased here.
Sure. Yeah, sure.
So I run a platform called Go Fractional, which is both a rallying cry for clients. This is a choice. You should choose this as an option, but also for people. You should go fractional with your skill set. You just mentioned before, you probably wouldn't be a good full-time employee. Why not? We can get into that or unpack it.
Yeah.
But you might be great at working with 3 companies.
Right.
So it's kind of a choice, and it's a choice for clients. It's a choice for people.
Yeah.
And that's how I think about, both sides, clients and talent. But the answer to your question is in both educating them on what these options are, but there's comfort in what they're already doing. So most people have an accountant and they work with many clients.
Right.
Most people, businesses anyway, have a lawyer and they work with many clients. Most people have they have a board member if they're a startup. They have an advisor. And the reason why you like working with these people is because they're bringing a huge amount of information and skills from the other things they're doing. They're seeing other companies. They're working with other clients, right? They're bringing precedents in law or legal. You want that and you need that. It's too expensive to bring them in-house, and you want them working on lots of other jobs because it informs what you do. That's literally what fractional is. They just don't realize it. And once you put in that context, they're like, oh, we've been working with an outside designer. She helps us X hours a week. We also work with an outsourced accountant. We also work with outside counsel, and they work with this great law firm. And that's the reason why you do that. Now, when you introduce this idea, hey, do you want someone who's done this 3 times before to work with you 3 days a week and your junior employees to mentor them? They're like, of course.
Right.
And then, this is again, I'm pretty biased here, but the icing on the cake is they'll do it at a fraction of the cost.
Well,
it would cost you
fractional means multiple things. It's time,
exactly.
But also cost. Yeah, of course.
Anyway, I could go on and on about it.
But the other thing I think about the difference between fractional and, let's say, a freelancer is, I think a fractional person, unlike a freelancer for the most part, is a part of the team. You're not there just as a consultant. You are there, it doesn't have to be 20 hours a week. It could be, depending on what your fractional role is, could be 10 hours a week, it could be 2 hours. I don't really think about the things in terms of hours, but I do think that if you're a fractional C-level person, you are there to have skin in the game. Doesn't necessarily mean equity, it can, but to me, that's a little bit of a semantic difference. But I don't think most contractors have a voice. I think oftentimes they don't have a voice because they're expected to do maybe not what they're told to do, but the best ones make themselves a part of the team. But the average contractor is there to execute. Whereas I think someone who's a fractional person is there to lead, if that makes sense.
It does. So I think the definitions matter. The mechanics are probably the same. They're a 1099 contractor, at least in the US, paid on a part-time basis. Those 3 words you just mentioned are things I think about all the time. What is the difference between a consultant and a fractional person? In my mind, A consultant will come with a deck and an idea
Yeah.
and probably be working at like 100,000 employee consulting firm. Nothing against the big,
Yeah.
companies out there, but they also give air cover to the executives. They probably work for publicly traded companies, and they're bringing that consulting confidence to give the executive team who doesn't know what to do a choice path, but they don't tactically do anything. Somebody who's fractional does two things. They come in and do the strategy and then execute the playbook.
Yeah.
They tactically have their hand on the wheel. Now, the third word is freelancer. I don't necessarily know, like, that's probably more towards what I'm saying. To me, there's a playbook. They're going to come in and do it. They're probably, thinking about things on an hourly basis. I do think that retainer-based, value-based pricing for fractional people makes the most sense.
Me too. Oh, I totally agree.
Because they're bringing 10 years of experience in 1 hour to save you potentially $100,000 mistake.
Right. Well, and I'm going to probably say something I shouldn't right now, but when it comes to those kind of bigger, those 100,000 person consulting companies, oftentimes, you mentioned like you're hiring this fractional person to be for their expertise, for the 10 years or more of expertise. Oftentimes in consulting companies, you're hiring the company for that, but the person you're actually getting most likely doesn't have that. They may have a boss who does, but the person is on the ground, doing the day-to-day work, who's making the deck, probably is somewhere like 3 to 5 years out of school, and not a knock on them as a person, but hard for them to solve problems that they've never even encountered before.
I couldn't agree more. I feel like you should be a paid spokesperson for Go Fractional, because you're like selling the service. You're talking about the agency problem and the game of telephone. The new business team, super slick.
Yeah.
They're going to show you amazing stuff. Who you work with matters, especially when you're developing a new product or bringing something to market, or you need to really lean on somebody great. That disconnect between that new business team and the person implementing things is a huge gap. So the problem we hear a lot, and we do these takeovers and cleanups and other things, is I had a project manager and they were taking these things and putting them into a system. And that system was going to the people who were doing the work.
Yeah.
And that's like, if you think about it, that's 4 hops away from the person who created the decision, had the stand up, or like did the meeting. Instead, if you short circuit that and have that person join the team, join the meeting, join the stand up, go and take away the work, influence the strategy, and then say, I'm going to execute against it. You've shortened the whole cycle. Now for that person, I would love to hear your thoughts on this. They want to work with great clients. They don't want to have crappy sales calls, and they want to have all the back office stuff handled. And what does that look like? Essentially looks like an agent. Like, this is why sports, athletes have it. This is why like musicians have agents. This is why like models have agents. And we act in that way for people. So Go Fractional handles the accounting and invoicing. It handles the proposals and sales process. And then of course, checks in with both sides to see how it's going. People love that because they don't want to do any of that stuff. They want to work with great clients and produce great results. You probably can talk about the war stories and scar tissue with like pitching clients and wasting time.
Many.
Unqualified companies that come to you trying to brain pick ideas and brain drain you versus pay you for your time.
Many times. And like one of the things that at Charming Robot, we've never, I would say 99% have always refused to do like spec work, because I really believe in understanding what a strategy should be before we do any solution oriented things. And I think that so many agents, and the agency problem is kind of the opposite problem of the consultant problem, right? The agency, meaning like a creative agency, they're often like just trying to get the work so they can do the design work. And the way I've always run my agency is we start with strategy. Like nothing can be done without strategy. So we have the deck, but then we execute on it until we're obsolete or whatever. And it's what kind of led me into fractional, because I was like, I want to do this beyond just what my agency can do. I want to do this at companies who can't afford an agency, or maybe who want to build an internal team, but need some of that leadership that you're talking about that comes from launching 100 products or whatever. And so that is exactly why I think about this as a great model, or a great, I don't know if it's a new way of thinking, but more an evolved way of thinking of how we work, because you don't need to go to an agency, a bigger boutique that'll charge you so much money, but they're not all in it either. You know what I mean? Like I say that the fractional person has skin in the game. As an agency, most agencies don't. They're on a work for hire basis. And I say that as a company who takes equity in companies and tries not to be that way. But man, like that's how you're looked at also.
By the way, we should get into that because I think it's a great way to grow a portfolio. It's not short-term cash, but it's long-term real value creation. Yeah, when they're doing it, it's also how they make a living. It's how they're earning. So it's really important to them to create great work versus being a W-2 full-time employee at an agency.
Right.
Right? Like the partners at the top are taking the results of that work, and the folks at the bottom are trying to build up a reputation, maybe go somewhere else. So we see people that have done that for 5 years or 10 years. We see people that are making a living this way. What you just mentioned is important, but not a lot of people see the value of setting the strategy first. It actually saves you time and money.
I know, crazy.
But I think when you've done it before or worked with a founder who's been around the block, that's when you find somebody who like, yeah, if we spend the time here and that forcing function you do to go through the strategy is like, it pays off because they're then able to like think about it and then, execute on whatever they come up with or whatever you come up with.
So when you have these, you have Go Fractional, but you also have the fractional fund. Are those two different things?
Yeah. So we don't actually have a fractional fund. We are very interested in, and I think this is a very fun topic, the idea of, first of all, let's talk about equity. You can get paid in two ways. Someone can pay you in cash or they can pay you in equity. We've both been and worked at a lot of startups. So that model makes sense, but it doesn't put food on the table, pay your mortgage, and like pay any bills.
Definitely not.
So you can take a mix of those two things, but it's very hard for a platform or a marketplace like Go Fractional to take equity because of the incentive alignment. Instead, what I've been thinking about is two things. One, we have a lot of people who are interested in building something on the side. So they're funding their own life to allow themselves personal runway to build a thing. So this is like nights and weekends. Maybe they're working 3 days a week for a company, getting paid, and they're working on their project 2 days a week. First of all, by not being a VC fund, we don't care about the possible like $1 billion outcome with that company. Maybe that's a $10 million a year company. Maybe it's a $50 million a year company. I don't want to speak for you, but to me, that's pretty exciting.
Yeah.
Now, if it's a venture scale company, great. So that's on the talent side. Engineers, COOs, other people who are working on something on the side. To me, that's an incredible look at a potential company that might need capital to grow. The other side is pretty exciting. When someone is inside of a company working, you will know more diligence than any VC in history by having somebody who's been there for 3 months. You'll know how the CEO thinks. You'll know how they're hiring. You know how they're growing. You'll know everything about the business. So it's an embedded diligence partner to make a decision.
Yeah.
That person, in many cases, doesn't have the capital to invest. So in an ideal world, I would back them, effectively building like a super scouts program and split the carry. So they might say, look, I've been working in your company for 6 months. You're fundraising. I would love to invest 50K or 100K. They give that person an allocation and maybe we fill most of it. Coupled with that, the third layer is opening up that opportunity to the community. So maybe they know that operator. Maybe they know that Go Fractional talent member. Maybe they get excited about the company. This is a way for them to diversify their own portfolio, get access to those companies, and back that person. Obviously, the carry would be commensurate with like the bulk of it being whoever the capital provider is.
Right.
But then that person's excited and the CEO is excited. So it's this amazing flywheel, which is not yet spinning.
I was wondering, how does that go so far?
Well, step one is to raise capital to do so, which is not actively happening right now.
Okay. But eventually that's the goal.
Opportunistically and doing so, like if we found a great company and somebody diligenced a great CEO, I think we would do it. I'm not pointing to a pool of capital now that we're trying to deploy.
Do you think that's a venture scale thing, or how do you see that working?
Here's the beauty of it. It doesn't have to be, especially if it's personal capital.
Right.
But yes, I mean, we see active venture scale, at least to the companies that have raised opportunities before everyone else, because we're building the product.
Right. Of course. Yeah.
Or there's people that left to build a thing. Yeah. So I think it's a really interesting, in VC speak, this would be like deal flow.
Right. So we'll talk a little bit about how you got to where you are today, but thinking about a couple of things you've worked on, thinking like with Expa in particular and working in venture, like in that journey that you've been on, what brought you to a place where you're like, this is the thing I really want to dedicate my time to. We talked about why you believe in it. We're in agreement on that. But like, what makes us like take a pause and say, you know what? Of all the things I've done, this is my thing, at least right now.
Well, life is the short answer, right? Like the ups and downs, the trials and tribulations. But so my background's been in early stage VC and startups. And so I've been on both sides of the table, both sides of that equation. I really love the art and craft and apprenticeship model of VC. Like I think you learn it by doing it and being around smart people who are deploying capital and working with founders. I do think you need to earn the right to like give advice and spend time with someone. And I think working with what I think are some of the best and great mentors, like being a board observer, board member, you know, putting your reputation and money on the line into something is very different than, you know, being a junior member of something. And
Sure.
I worked at Union Square Ventures early on. We invested in a company called Foursquare, a handful of people. I think that's where we crossed paths. And then I left and joined there full time. I was there for 6 years, which in startup land is like 100 years.
Yeah, that's 100 years. Yeah.
And it went from, you know, well, 2 people early on to 10 people when I joined to, you know, like hundreds of people.
Yeah.
And I wore like a BD hat and a sales hat and lots of other hats, and it was a lot of fun. And then one of the co-founders of Foursquare tapped me on the shoulder, who was at a startup studio, which means in their case, a place called Expa, that was a group of people, serial entrepreneurs, some with a lot of success, some earlier in their careers, creating companies, their ideas. And he said, why don't you come here instead of going and being a COO somewhere, be a roaming COO across the studio companies. I thought that was great. Let me go do that. Multiple companies, lots of diversity, like diversified upside. Like this sounds like a lot of fun.
Right.
Sometime into that journey, they raised a second fund. They raised $100 million and said, hey, we want to invest in outside founder. So I helped stand up what was then called Expa Labs, an accelerator.
Yeah.
This is when outside people apply in for dollars and value, and at that time coming in and working in an office.
Right.
And there was a lot of value, I think, there. Like I created the program. Went from zero to like funded companies, created companies, founders with their first check in 6 months. I was like very proud of that timeline.
Yeah.
And the thinking was that if you're working with a company that's a year ahead or 5 years ahead, you will have the same issues. You'll have the same questions, and they'll actually benefit from you and you'll benefit from them. So we did that, and it was great. We did a bunch of cohorts, a bunch of great companies came out of it. Did that for 3 years. They didn't want to do that so much anymore. Actually left. And that's when I started doing really what I now call fractional COO work. So this was for startups and capital allocators like VCs who needed operational help, companies who needed operational help. I'm kind of skipping a few chapters to catch you up to today.
Yeah, we'll go through a lot more. Don't worry.
Okay, fair enough. But the answer was that people started knocking on my door when I had a full plate. Hey, I need this. Can you help me? And of course, it sucks to say no, but I could refer them to someone who could say yes.
Yeah.
And that actually started me down a path of like building a bench or building like a spreadsheet or an Airtable of like really qualified people. In fact, you were on it from like way early on. I don't even know if you knew this, but it was like, who do you know who could do this or like do CPO work? And it's like,
I didn't know that. I'm very flattered. Thank you.
And it was around that time that I reconnected with one of the CEOs from the accelerator that I had invested in way back then. He built an amazing company that exited to Greenhouse, was looking for what's next, and actually started doing fractional CTO work.
What company was that and who was it?
The company was called Interseller.
Okay.
It was a sales marketing tool that helped you with outreach, helped you with different like identifying people and like loading into a system. Great for recruiters, still around, acquired by Greenhouse, great company.
Nice.
My partner's John Grana in Go Fractional, and he's built and been CTO at 3 different companies. So he's an amazing tech lead behind all this and started doing fractional CTO work. And if you think about those two things together, an incredible network, an incredible group of people, an incredible bunch of engineers and operators in all different disciplines, that's how this all started. And for me, like, it's sort of a weird thing, but I've spent my whole life being what I consider to be like a dot connector, like connecting people together, connecting capital with founders, connecting things and ideas. I love spending time with companies. And in a way, like this allows me to do that. I could sit down with the founder, identify like, where are you stuck? What are your challenges? What do you need? What do you need that you don't have?
Right.
And then I can point them to these people to start solving their problems, solving their challenges, and help them. I really believe in the thinking of a CEO. A CEO's job is to fire themselves out of every role. And if you think about that, the hardest thing to do is find talent.
Right.
So they do the
Right.
job, they do a shitty job, and then they find someone to do it better. This is a great way to accelerate that process. Like I like to say, you could do it in 3 weeks versus 3 months.
Oh my God, totally. Yeah. Especially because that person you're dot connecting to, or you're referring, probably has a network of people they're going to bring in that they already know can be successful as well. So it's kind of a domino effect, you know?
By the way, it's even worse. You have to hire a recruiter, pay them a retainer,
Oh yeah,
pay them a percent of that person's salary. Then you have to give them stock.
that's right.
Then you have to give them a review. Then you have to deal with them asking every year for a promotion and a title bump.
Yeah.
Or you can get started in 2 weeks with somebody who's better, who doesn't want to work full time.
I had this conversation the other day with someone about this exact thing. So I'm in my fractional roles. I also bring in people when I'm building a team who are full-time. Not contractors, like who I'm like, this is a great UX person. This is a great PM. This is a great designer, whatever. But I bring them in because I've been working with them in one way or another for some 20 years. You know what I mean? Like we have a rapport, we have a shorthand. I'm like, this person can do this job, come in. And this person I was talking to was like, well, don't you think we should be doing a search? And I'm like, well, I need someone tomorrow.
Right.
And if I need someone tomorrow, like I could go to like Greenhouse, or I could go to a recruiter, or I could go to, I don't know, Fiverr, whatever. But I'm like, I'm not going to get the quality and the speed of person I need in such a short amount of time without tapping into my network. Now, there are drawbacks to that, right? There's certainly maybe a new blood diversity issue there, which I acknowledge 100% can be a problem. And I do try to change that as I grow teams to make sure that there is a bigger hire. But I was like, this person we need tomorrow, we can recruit the next one, but this one we need now. And I think that is actually it's interesting. I think that there's a line of thinking that makes sense for wanting to use a recruiter, but when you're trying to move at the speed of a startup, especially, like you don't have that budget, or I think that that luxury of time.
I totally agree. Again, you sound like a paid spokesperson for what I'm building. So just for the audience, you are not being paid or supported
No, I'm
in any
not.
way
No,
for
I'm
this,
not.
but
No.
you're living it. You're like living the thing. So what I think you described there, which is important, is like Dan's bar. There's two versions of that. One is the one we're in right now.
Yep.
And then there's the bar you have of people you've worked with and
Right.
people you've gelled with. And that like flow state you can get to really, really quickly. Everybody knows what it's like to work with somebody great. And everybody knows what it's like to work with somebody horrible.
Oh yes.
And if you ask the best teams, hey, all the stuff we're doing on the recruiting side, whether it's paid or like promotions or searching, you say, where do the best people come from? They're going to tell you from their own network.
Right. Referrals.
Every single time.
Always. Yeah.
So knowing that, how can you possibly go outside of that? And that's what I come back to. Speaking of that bar being really, really high, we meet with, vet, and keep an elite group of talent by having that bar behind. Now, that means that some people are not set up for this. Like you said this earlier, some people might not be well suited for it, and
Right.
that's okay.
Yeah.
And some people are very well suited for it. And that bar is true on both sides. They come to us because we find really good vetted clients. Like you could start tomorrow.
Right.
And a client can start working with someone tomorrow. But you got to match those two things up like any market.
Yeah. That client has to buy into the idea too. It's not just that I might be great at that one thing or being a fractional person, but if the person who you're working with doesn't buy into it, either thinks you're a full-time employee and you're not, or thinks that you're, whatever it is and you're not, then, or doesn't tell the team what you are, right?
Yeah.
Like if the team thinks you're full-time, maybe you accept that, maybe you don't. That's up to you as a fractional person. But I think there has to be buy-in 360. Otherwise, it's just maybe not doomed to fail, but the chances are much higher.
We just look at alignment and incentives. So we support people going full time. And I think that's healthy in two ways. One, they understood what it was like to be a consultant, and they probably will come back and say, hey, I'd love to pull in a part-time team. Two, we act like a recruiter, but charge about half as much.
Yeah.
So if they fall in love and the other side falls in love, great, go work there. Which is great. It also introduces something that lowers the stakes for both sides. called try before you buy. You don't have the reputation risk. You don't have the big like LinkedIn broadcast. You don't have the big like wake up in 3 months and you're like, guess what? This place is filled with bozos. I got to get out of here. You can try it out. By the way, going back to the diligence, like diligence for the person and for the company. Like the skeletons come out of the closet when you're like there for 30 days and you're like, wow, this place is a total shit show.
Oh yeah. Then you're like, thank you very much, but I'm moving on. And
Appreciate it. My contract ends in 2 months.
Yeah.
Wish you all the best.
Totally. So one of the things you mentioned earlier is the idea that you've always been someone who like likes to connect the dots. Now, you going back to pre USV, maybe college, maybe high school. You grew up in Manhattan?
I did.
Okay. High school here, Columbia High School, yeah? Okay. So does that connecting the dots like initiative or kind of impetus, does that start then, or is that something that grew over time?
That's a really good question. When did the dot connecting start?
Yeah.
I don't know. I've never really thought about it. Where my head went is that I am from New York, grew up in the city, which becomes like a zoo animal for people. They're like, whoa, what was it like? Like what? Hey, what? How? Why? How did you survive? I don't know when that started.
Well, think about like when you're in high school or college, like what kind of things beyond just obviously studying or maybe not studying? I don't know what your high school was like. What were you doing?
Yeah, maybe it was around that time. So 2 things are worth bringing up. One is I transferred schools. And so that was immediately like, okay, I've got to jump in, join some groups, join some programs, join some like communities so I can meet people. Like if you're not a freshman in school, like you make all your friends, you find your roommates, like when you're a sophomore, you got to do that.
Yeah.
The second thing is I've always been like a bit of an entrepreneur and a builder. This sounds like, I'm sure there's a lot of people that fit this mold, but I was like building websites. And it came from like my passion at the time. Like as a teenager, I played a lot of video games.
Sure.
Online games. But that was when that was considered to be odd and like a computer nerd.
Sure. Oh,
so
yeah.
I spent an inordinate amount of time on it. My parents weren't supportive in the sense that they were like, you're spending too much time on the computer. Little did they know this would be a thing.
Right.
They were like, go get a job just to like buy, you know, you want to more computer parts, or like you want an ISDN line, like go get a job and like pay for it. So I did. That probably led to more entrepreneurial pursuits, like building websites, trying to monetize them, like building these networks. The first time I ever started writing and publishing online, again, this is like 2004. One of the things I built was a network of like-minded bloggers. So maybe that was like,
there you are. You're starting to connect the dots there.
that's what I mean.
see,
I'm trying to look for these moments of like constellations of people and services and platforms. And that was a good example of it because we all were trying to do the same thing. And it was like, great, we can do more together than we can alone.
Yeah. Yeah. That's, I mean, talking about that. So you must have been in college or just out of college when you started doing that?
Yeah. So I started, writing about and publishing my thoughts on early stage companies, like kicking the tires, being like the first user, trying stuff out, and like basically putting out a review. So
what was this called?
It was called Marketing FM.
Marketing FM.
And I'll tell you why. I was working in a job where I didn't want my name to be associated with my thoughts online because I thought they would read my thoughts about like the future of TV and the future of stuff. Again, like such a young mind, like they would read it and I get fired.
I mean, that's probably not too far from the truth, especially today, but like, you know, like back then, maybe not as much.
It's definitely true, but like there's more nefarious and like incendiary things you could say. I was like, people are going to stop watching as much TV and like ads will decline. And working in an agency, it's like they didn't want to hear that because ads are what they did.
Right. Yeah.
Meanwhile, super self-centered to think anyone was reading my blog. Then I put my name on it. Then I started doing it under just like ericgfriedman.com. And that actually led me to the guys at USB. So the application process was on their blog, which again, rewind the clock, take a time machine back to 2004.
Yeah.
All they had was a blog. This was like very novel. And they said, if you are interested in working here, reply in a comment with your name and a link to your web presence. That's it.
And you only, in 2004, maybe you have Friendster and that's about it?
Yeah,
maybe
part of that
MySpace?
post was like, share your MySpace, share your Friendster, share a bunch of these services don't exist anymore.
Yeah.
So I replied with something like my name, a link to my blog, and like NYC native or something. And kind of a fun story, that interview process was rigorous. And I'll never forget, I sat down with one of the partners, guy who's less in the spotlight, Brad Burnham. And I gave him my resume. I sat down, like organized, like ready to go.
Yeah.
And he slid the resume back over to me and he's like, I don't need this. And I was like, okay, great. Didn't get the job. Thanks so much. And he said, no, anybody can fake 5 bullets on a resume, but you can't fake 500 blog posts. I read your blog. Let's talk about it. Because I had been sharing my opinion about companies and people and things and like the future. And like, I'm not trying to say I was right by any means, but I had shown like my thinking, and they were much more interested in having someone like join the table, so to speak, where they could like understand how they think about things, which is kind of cool. And I've always taken that with me. And whenever somebody asks me for this kind of like career advice, I always encourage them to publish, because that work will arrive before you do.
Yeah.
Just like you did your research for this, like you'll Google their name, you'll check out their background, you'll see their stuff. Like if someday you publish a piece on, here's what I've learned from a decade of being a fractional CPO, what a great thing to read before having a meeting with you.
I mean, I had a book that came out in 2019 called The Barstool MBA. And it's everything I've learned from running bars and helping startups and the parallels between bars and startups.
Amazing.
And most of the startup stuff beyond my own experience came from interviews from this podcast. But also the bar stuff was like every day to bar is like a startup. Every day is like, if today sucks, you're not like that. Your revenue from today could screw you for tomorrow. You know what I mean? So but if someone was interviewing me and they didn't Google me and didn't find that out about me and started asking me questions about my experience, I'd be like, it's right there. It's right there.
That's amazing. I got to check out that book. And now for some reason you're slumming it with me. So it sounds like things are going downhill. But those people are great.
Well, I mean, look, you're no slouch yourself. I mean, you have some really good experience, but I think thinking about how you went from writing a blog that you were afraid to put your name on to being recognized for that work under your own name to a place that, I mean, 2004, 2005 USV, they're not as big a name as they are today, but they're still a pretty big name.
True. And to connect the dots,
as you
I
do.
started in 2004. I worked there in 2008.
Okay.
So they started in 2004, weirdly. And then I was just blogging for years and years and years, and I never knew what it could be. Or like, I needed to get this out of my head, or I needed to like try something out and be like, here's what I thought. And the thing that I learned was like, it challenges your thinking in a way that other things don't. Like you might read it and feel like, oh man, this is the coolest thing ever. You're totally wrong.
But that's okay.
Well, I'm saying
okay
it's welcoming. It's great.
Yeah.
Like there's no better way to challenge your thinking than to put something out there and have, hopefully not a troll, but like somebody from the internet be like, hey, here's what I think.
Oh yeah. Look, I've believed for the past, like, I don't know, 15 years or so that like the idea, if you want to work in tech and you want to like put your thoughts out there, the more you can be transparent about it. Not that I didn't believe that before, like 2007, 2006, but like the ability to do that across multiple platforms didn't exist as much. And the idea that you were a person, not a troll, was, let's say, the line was a little different, free social media.
Totally.
And so like now, like on all my social media accounts, I'm me, for better or worse. Like,
right, it's there
like,
forever.
It's out there and you can read it. You want to stay here like flat, that's fine. But if you really have thoughts and really like want to make an impact on the industry, you got to share them, whether people agree with you or not.
I have so much to say on this topic. I don't know where you want to go next, but
no,
I could espouse on it.
Talk about what you mean.
Okay, this is a fun story. When I was at Foursquare, I was the person who would be on the speaker side of what they called the MBA Trek. Have you ever heard of these things? So like a bunch of MBAs coming to town, and they like tour all the cool companies. At the time, this was like one of the stops. You know, it was like Facebook and like Twitter and like Foursquare. So I don't know, maybe I'm like a sucker, maybe I'm a nice guy, but they'd be like, okay, this school is coming to town. Like, you want to talk to these 20 people? Like, sure, bring them into the auditorium and like have a talk.
Yeah.
And they would come with what they call like a resume book and a cover letter. I don't know if you've seen one of these. I didn't get my MBA, but like
I didn't either. I have a lot of thoughts on that too, but we won't go into that.
We should go there next. Fred Wilson called working at USV a practical MBA. Hands-on for 2 years versus being out of market and $180,000. So I would be this guy, these, they're not kids, but like these people would come in, they're all getting their MBA, all super smart. I give my spiel and then they'd give me the book. There's like a bunch of cover letters. Like I did this, that, and the other thing. I'm greater than the best, and the top 1%. And then the resumes. And they'd be like, how do we get a job here? I'd be like, I don't want this book. Save the paper. That's one.
Yeah.
Two, I'd say, okay, I actually would tell them a story that I learned at USV that Fred Wilson kind of drumbeated early on, which is the principle of publishing, which is called 1-9-90. 1% create, 9% comment, and 90% read.
Yeah.
So I'd be like, here's the deal. Here's my email address, eric@foursquare.com. Everybody gets a business card. They were like blown away. Because they're like, all the places we went, like we couldn't get the info. We couldn't have a point of contact. Like nobody would be with us. And I said, okay, here's the stipulation. If you write me an email and you send me your cover letter and your resume and you ask for a job, I'm not going to answer. However, if you give me feedback about the app, good or bad, constructive or supportive, 3 things that you do differently, 5 things that you enjoy. Here's 6 things that are opportunities. Use your acronym, SWOT analysis, whatever you want to do. If you write that to me, I'll get back to you. And the exact principle is in effect.
Yeah.
Yeah. 1-9-90. Guess what the percentage was of people who did what I said? 1%.
Yeah. Yeah. I think
so I wouldn't have to worry.
it's easy.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
50 people in the audience, 1%. 100 people in the audience, 1 would do the thing.
I totally believe that. It's funny. I never thought about that from a job standpoint, but I'll tell you, like I used to do, and I still do, like a fair amount of teaching and speaking engagements, and like the amount of people I get with emails being like, or LinkedIn or whatever, like, I want to connect with you.
What do you do?
If someone wants to connect with me that was at a thing I gave a talk at, I'll connect with them.
Okay.
But I won't reply to them. If they say something to me that's interesting, that like actually is meaningful, sometimes it's they actually want to grab coffee, and if I have time to grab coffee, like it's a meaningful thing, I'm like, I'll grab coffee. Coffee can be 10 minutes. It can be an hour. But I've hired 2 or 3 of the best people I've ever worked with from those interactions where they got to a point where I was like, I'll have coffee with you. And I knew within 10 minutes, I was like, you need to come work with us. And like,
so I think about these in 2 ways. There's a brain gain and there's a brain drain. And those are like, sounds like a brain drain.
The latter ones.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. Totally. But the ones of the brain gain are great because you end up learning from them, and they become your colleagues for life or friends for life in a lot of ways.
I totally agree. I wrote about this in something I called the coffee equation. So people would reach out, hey, I'd love to pick your brain. First of all, I don't love that expression.
Yeah.
Because nobody wants to have their brain picked. I think somebody, like, I've seen this a few times. I have no idea where the attribution is, but like, I think about it all the time.
Yeah.
The other is if founders started having coffees with everybody who thought the thing they were doing was cool, all they would do was have coffees and they'd stop doing the cool stuff.
That's right.
So the coffee equation is this. Why should someone sit down with you and have coffee? Show them some value first.
Right.
Which is really, really hard. And I get it. It's like a high bar, but I always think about that.
But I think a high bar is a good thing to have. Like, we're all busy. Doesn't mean we're important. It just means we have stuff we got to get done during the day. I don't think of myself as better or worse than anyone else, but my time has to be spent doing things that are valuable to me or to what I'm working on. And
it's a hard balance. You and I are the same, so it's like an interesting conversation. But I talk with a handful of people who are diametrically opposed to ever saying yes to those meetings, to those coffees, to those things, because it completely takes them off of the focus of what they're doing.
I'm sure.
And it's led me to find and meet great people too.
Right.
But I respect other.
No, and I get it too. But I also think to myself, like, I've been fortunate enough for people to give me chances in my career, from day 1 to day whatever this is. And I hope more people do that for me in the future. And I want to find people who I want to talk to and can learn from and hopefully can get a relationship with. And, not everyone's going to become your best friend, but there's certainly something to be gained if you say yes to the right people. If you say yes to everything, you're going to lose all your time.
I think you and I are cut from the same cloth, and that somebody gave us that shot.
Yeah.
Somebody said yes out of that audience. Me with that blog comment, you with some other things. Like, I think we want to give back in the same way, or at least I do.
Yeah, no, 100%. Well, so let's go back to Union Square, and we'll get through some of the other stuff you're working on. But so you get to Union Square. What's the role when they hire you after they've been reading your blog?
Catch all everything. No VCs at the time really had what they call now platform teams. So it was like diligence on companies, shadowing one of the partners on a board, setting up an LP summit, like fundraising,
but you didn't know how to do any of this stuff.
No.
So, the easy answer to that question, by the way, is I just have to learn how to do it, which I'm sure is true. But
true trial by fire.
Yeah.
Very flat structures, 5 people.
That makes like everyone's wearing hats. So yeah, sure.
Yeah. It's an apprenticeship model. It's an apprenticeship industry. I don't know how you would learn it like without doing it. At the time too, there was like very few books published. I remember like buying this book about like heavy math cap table stuff that was like $70. And I was like reading it and like trying to understand what to do. But like until you run one of them yourself, like meaning in Excel,
Yeah.
which is like super nerdy, but you have to do it. You have to like grind your way through it. Now you could probably have like a myriad of things. There's books written. There's so many other vlogs. People have like followed in those footsteps. It sounds like I walked to school uphill both ways, but like it was not, there wasn't like all of these different transparent things that you have today, which is great. I try and give back to that too.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure now there are
They were
templates
pioneers
in like Google Sheets or whatever you can make instead of having to write some.
Yeah, I mean, there's templates and people selling templates and master classes and workshops and different things. I mean, it's funny to think about this, but I know like 3 different people who are teaching up and coming investors the basically battle testing them for these scenarios. And it's interesting to think about. They get full courses and they make a living doing it.
In like people who are going to be actual VCs or people who are just like,
they want to learn how to do this stuff. And then for the teams, like I've heard people are like, yeah, go take this course.
what do you think about the idea of those courses? Whether your friends are teaching them or not, I mean, do you think that they are actually valuable from this will make you a better investor, or this will make you understand the industry better, or something else?
Well, it's 2 choices. You can either learn by the apprenticeship model and work with a partner who's done it before, and hopefully they take you under their wing and they teach you.
Yeah.
Very hard to get those jobs. Very hard to find that mentor, and very hard to find the person with the time and energy to do it.
Yeah.
The next best thing is, I think, hands-on learning, which is a active, synchronous workshop. The next best thing is asynchronous. And then maybe the worst of all worlds is like reading in a textbook.
Sure.
It would be like reading about design.
Yeah. Yeah. But
reading a book on Photoshop.
But I think that, I don't know, I find things like boot camps on that stuff to be ineffective.
Yeah, this is not that.
Okay.
This is
That's
like,
what I'm trying to understand.
you will be in a cohort with 10 other associates at top tier VCs and learn together.
That's what they're teaching.
That is what they're bringing together. That's what you're paying for.
Yeah.
Paid for by the firm.
So thinking about that, like learning on the go job you had at USB, Foursquare being a portfolio company of theirs, by the time you joined, you said there were 10 people when you joined?
There were 10 people when I joined, but we brought them in. There was 2 people when they started. I mean, we diligenced the company and invested in the company.
Did you invest in them before launch or after launch?
I
forget.
It was
after that South by Southwest launch, right?
Yes, they had launched. You could use it as a consumer, and it was August of 2010.
Okay, so walking from the investor into the portfolio company as an employee, or maybe your partner, whatever.
Yeah.
What is that?
I was an employee.
What does that look like? You've been looking at it from the outside. What is the difference when you walk in and now you're part of it? And what do you see that you weren't aware of maybe at the time?
It's exactly like the J curve of adoption, where like everything is shiny and great and new when you're at the beginning, or like when you're making an investment, or you write the check, or you convince yourself this is a good idea.
Yeah.
Same is true for a job. And I think you go in, you're like, this is great.
Yeah.
And then there's like the trough of disillusionment. And you're like, oh my God, this is nothing against Foursquare. This is nothing against the people.
No, sure.
I just think it's true no matter what. And then you come up like the slope of enlightenment, and you're like, okay, I got to fix all this stuff. There's a guy I worked with and hired a long, long time ago now. And I used to be, I used to put out fires. And he was like, he changed my whole perspective on it. His name's Dave Greenberger. He said, you can't prevent these fires. You've just got to work on the biggest one. I used to be in the fire prevention business.
Right.
And then he was like, once you realize there's always going to be a fire, just work on the biggest one.
It's really smart advice.
It's great advice. He's a great guy, super thoughtful sales leader. And I think you go in and you start, maybe it wasn't the CEO, certainly wasn't the CEO, but you fire yourself out of every job. You're like, okay, let me do the thing. Let me write the playbook, and let me hire someone to do it.
Yeah.
And then you do it again. You're like, oh my God, that's a fire. Let me put it out. Write the playbook, write the spec, do the best job you can, find someone to do it. And you just keep passing that baton.
It's a good philosophy to have. If you can manage to do it,
If you can do it.
Yeah. A lot of CEOs can't do that.
Very true.
Yeah. I mean, I love working with the ones who I would say a great CEO surrounds himself with the best lieutenants, and they trust their lieutenants to like bring their expertise to make the right decisions. And the worst CEOs are the ones who never listen to the lieutenants and only do what.
Well, think about what you just said, and think about the goal of. Would you agree with this statement? The goal of hiring someone is to hire someone smarter than you.
Always.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now apply that to CEOs and their.
I mean, as someone who was a
Their
CEO,
egos.
and I only want that.
You only want that, but then when you look at some, not all,
I
some
see.
CEOs, they by default can't do that, and so it's diminishing returns all
That's
the way
true.
down. But think
Right.
about how low ego you have to be to hire a group of people around you who are smarter than you.
Oh, I know.
Think about how accepting you have to be. Think about the environment you have to create. I think about this all the time. Here's an interesting question. How do you find out what kind of a leader they are with asking questions, seeing a deck, and having a partner meeting versus having somebody in there who's building and making decisions and seeing how things happen? I think that there's something missing from the traditional way things are done versus what I described, which is the going all the way back to having an embedded person in the company going to give you better data on
No,
how
I
they are as
think
a
that's-
leader
I think
than
that's very true.
anything
I
that
totally
I
agree
can
with
think
that.
of.
Yeah. So
So it's an unfair advantage.
but it's a great, great. So if so walking into Foursquare,
Yeah.
you have 10 people and you left 6 years later, right? So it's a big, that's a big amount of growth. I know over that time, ups and downs, but like, you know, but growth. When you think about what that company was when you walked into it, what did you think it was versus what it became?
I'll give you, okay, I walked in there, from the VC side of things, getting excited about it. This was the peak of, that shiny object. Foursquare was AdSense for the real world. Google had come out with their ad product, right? Intent, search.
Yep.
You type in yoga, guess what's going to be on the right-hand rail of that search? Ads for
Yoga.
That's right. Clothes, yoga studios, bar stuff, whatever. I don't even do yoga, so it's a bad example. But like you're going to have stuff associated with that, right?
Yeah.
Now, intent. Intent is value. Those ads are targeted to people who type that word. There's some interest in that word because you typed it.
That's right.
Now, what's going to give you better data? Somebody behind a computer who types in the word yoga or somebody that goes to a yoga studio 3 days a week?
Obviously the lab.
So that's where AdSense for the real world came in.
That's what you thought of it as when you
story,
walked in.
Yes, that's what I thought of it when I walked in.
Okay.
That story did not come true.
What
That's
happened?
okay.
Yeah, sure.
And I was wearing a BD hat. So it was partnerships, growth, consumer, maybe a little bit of if you build it, they will come, but we'll build that later. And I think maybe there's 2 chapters there. One was AdSense for the real world, and one was location intelligence, data sales.
Yeah. And you guys knew that off the top, and it was all about the data, not about the community, not about the consumer product.
I don't think so. I think it was genuinely like, how do we help out a bar like this
Right.
and an owner like this talk to their consumers?
Uh-huh.
And if you had that relationship with them, which is really important to me, again, we went a different direction. So this is like, a what if or like an alternate universe.
Right.
But you would want to have a relationship with those people. They'd want to have a relationship with you. And as a local advertiser, maybe you want to give them some digital reward or maybe a real life reward. I'm trying to stay away from the vernacular and stuff we used to talk about. And also, maybe there's somebody opening up nearby and they want to offer something to those people.
Right.
And that's AdSense for the real world. I have like a whole thing on this if you actually want to hear it.
I do.
Okay. The biggest lesson I learned out of the Foursquare, those 2 chapters, like what we did, is this. It is much easier to embrace behavior than create behavior.
Yeah.
So if someone does something a certain way, go with the flow.
I would say meet people where they are,
That's a great way to say it.
Yeah.
And I'll give you a quick story. The reason why, in my opinion, Instagram ate our lunch was pretty simple. You and me, as maybe like similar tech nerds, like iPhone users, Foursquare started with something called a check-in.
Right.
Digitally raising your hand to say, I'm here. I'm at fool's gold. And then after you did that, maybe we take some pictures. Maybe we tag a friend. Maybe we leave some comments. That action is not something people do.
Right.
Guess what they do?
They take pictures,
take
and later
pictures.
and post them later.
How many people, we could probably turn around and see people taking pictures right now.
100%.
So if you start with a picture, you might want to tag me in that picture. You might want to say where it was. You might want to leave a comment. And if you think about those two things, they're identical, but one is a brand new behavior and one is an existing behavior.
Yeah, that's right. And
so that was my big takeaway. So when somebody says, I'm building a better mousetrap, or this was a big one, I'm building a better Venmo. If everyone would just do this, it's going to work. And I'm like, great. How do you get the first person to do that?
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. That's the hardest part. And
so embrace behavior versus great behavior is like my, I look at companies and diligence companies, and like when I'm an angel in a company, like I think about that all the time.
So when you left Foursquare to go to Expa,
yeah,
what, like, you gave the pitch earlier as to why
I was ready to go be a COO. I was ready to go be a GM. I was looking around. I talked to a bunch of companies, talked to some portfolio companies, talked to other people, like went through interview processes. And then when I got this like sit down with Naveen, who's one of the co-founders, and met his then partners, it was like, wow, you could come do this GM COO thing with all these companies.
Yeah.
That sounds like way more fun.
Totally.
Help a bunch of people get, risk-adjusted return. You have a diversified portfolio, not just all your eggs in one basket. That's
and
what I did.
Expa was a fairly new model, wasn't it, at the time?
Yeah, studios have like a myriad. Studio means different things. It's almost as nebulous as BD.
Right.
Like, what does that even mean?
I remember talking to Naveen about it, and was Garrett a part of that too?
Yeah, so he started it, a guy called Garrett Camp. Many people know him from starting Uber, but he also
that, he did
StumbleUpon. Yeah, so you know this. Not a lot of people do. Fun fact is that, so I actually met him at South by Southwest also, and we had ribs together at this table. He was doing StumbleUpon and whatever.
Yeah.
Fast forward years later, it was like final part of my interview. I sat down, and it built this company, and I was like super nervous. And I was like, hey, I don't know if you remember this. He was like, oh, yeah. Remember that? Like, I remember that conversation.
Steel trap. He probably remembers my insult then too.
No, I doubt it. Super nice guy. But like, those are those like serendipitous moments that you look for. You never know. Like the road is very long.
Oh,
look at us now.
I know.
Like being from that office to sitting here.
One of my favorite things about that Foursquare office years ago, and it's something that like we talked about a lot on this podcast, and so many people come on it, but like that moment in time where it was Hard Candy Shell, Foursquare, Curb.
Yes.
A just great example of New York tech, I think, at the time. It makes me like wistful to think about it sometimes. And then also just like, oh God, I'm past that part of my life and moved on to other things. But
it was an amazing chapter. I have some of my best friends from that company.
Yeah.
Some of the best experiences and some of the best like learnings, what to do, what not to do, like building on that network growth. Not a lot of people know this. I had throughout the whole time, I ran an intern program as 40 different interns.
Oh, wow.
And someday I owe myself a post about where each of them has gone. And they have gone on to be founders, partners at VC firms, like amazing people. I am by no means responsible for their success, but I was able to sit down with them, maybe see something that others didn't, and then have them, come in for part of a journey that was amazing. And it's instrumental to them too. And I still keep in touch with those people.
You caught them early. That's a good
And invested in some of those companies.
Yeah.
Which is kind of fun.
So, and I know we're getting up on time here. So you since Expa, you've moved on, done venture as well as the kind of Go Fractional world. Like, is there part of you that still does the venture piece, or you?
I wish, and I wish I could get back to it. I don't have the capital to do it. I'm not associated with like a firm that does it. I have access to a bunch of great founders and incredible deal flow.
Yeah.
But I don't have like a pool of capital yet.
Right. Yeah.
I'll share with you something that took me a couple of years to say out loud, which is my goal is to be the best advisor in the world. And I think that happens through investing, operating, and coaching. I am not there today, but everything I decide to do with my time is like a step towards that. So when someone's like, hey, do you want to do this? Or do you want to do that? Or do you want to invest in this? Or do you want to work on this? I run it through that matrix of like, will this help me towards that goal?
That's a great filter, and that's a great place to end. Thank you so much for doing this, Eric.
Thanks for having me.
Cheers your soda water. There's a lime in it.
That's it for this episode of Story in a Bottle. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review for us in the iTunes store or wherever you listen. I'd like to thank our producers at 1459 Production Management and Charming Robots Eric Bowie for his continued production support.
And of course, I'd like to thank our guest, Eric Friedman, for graciously giving us his time.